Sego, I'm Dale Montour. It was here that the first blockade was set up. It was erected by the traditional people of Ganassadawga in a bid to stop the town of Oka from expanding a golf course on land which the Mohawks claim is theirs. The tragic conflict which ensued at Oka shocked us all. The event was a catalyst for Aboriginal communities from across the country. And never in the history of Canada have Aboriginal issues been so prominent in our minds and in the media. But what has happened to the people and the communities which ignited so much interest and who suffered so greatly more than a year ago?
The Pines. At the center of a land controversy between federal, provincial, municipal governments and Mohawk people for centuries. This is historic common lands which are of great importance to this local Mohawk population. It was they who originally planted these trees as one of the earliest reforestation efforts in North America. The Oka Golf Course, 9 holes of which is also situated on disputed land, and which the people of Ganassadawga have always claimed as theirs. But 9 holes just wasn't enough. In May of 1988, the Oka Golf Club submitted a proposal to the municipality of Oka to expand its golf course from 9 to 18 holes. Just under 2 years later, after futile efforts by the Mohawk people of Ganassadawga to block the expansion, they decided to erect a barricade on the secondary road in protection of their land. We visited the Pines 1 year after the crisis. I spoke with Ellen Gabriel, an activist and traditional member of the Longhouse, about what happened here and why.
Well, this is a dispute the people who've been living here have had for over 200 years, and the problem with the non-natives saying that we don't have a right to do anything on this land. Our people used to be jailed for cutting trees down so they could heat their homes or cook their food, and it hasn't changed. We're still here as, in a sense, squatters, according to the Canadian government. This is only for our benefit and use. And but the system of fraud is still going on. They had no right to sell this land according to our traditions and customs. The whole nation has to be notified if we're to cede or sell any of our land, and it has to go through the women first anyways. And none of that protocol has ever been followed by the Canadian government. This is not Canadian territory. This is Mohawk territory.
Has the land dispute been resolved?
No, not as far as we're concerned. We feel that we're back at square one. It's no different than last July 11th or before July 11th. The phases of development that were slotted for this area of our commons, the 18-hole golf course has been replaced with a condominium development. So we're still, our territory is still being entrenched upon, and our territory is still in danger. We've stated time and time again to Indian Affairs that this is something sacred to us. We have our medicines here, and we have animals who live in this forest, and it's ancient. It's an old forest. Our people planted these trees, and I don't think any kind of development can justify its eradication at all.
I thought that the federal government purchased the disputed lands last July.
Well, that's part of the propaganda that went out last summer, and they even told us that they had bought this land for $3.3 million, and our burial ground for $1. The area that they're talking about that they bought is on the other side, and it's clearly staked out by surveyor poles. This area was not even included, and they say that they didn't know, but they knew very well what parcels of land they bought. They number, and they have measurements of all this land anyway, so they knew perfectly well what they were doing.
So, the government of Canada was supposed to have purchased the land in dispute in order to return it to the Mohawks. But according to Ellen Gabriel, this didn't happen. Well, it was off to the office of the Honorable Monique Landry, Minister of State for Indian and Northern Affairs, not to be confused with the Minister of Indian and Northern Affairs, Mr. Tom Siddon. Her portfolio includes Quebec, and therefore the dispute that took place at Oka is within her mandate.
I'd like to discuss with you what's happening in the two Mohawk communities, in Ganawagga and Ganassadawga, since the Mohawk crisis was over. We were speaking to Ellen Gabriel, and she said that the land under dispute from last summer still has not been purchased. What is your response to that?
If you think of the reason for the dispute last summer, which was the Gulf, I mean, the crisis occurred because of the Gulf, development possibility. That land was purchased. But it is clear that in any negotiation, we have indicated to the community that we are willing to sit down with them and discuss the unification of land, which could include other land, which is still not negotiated. So we do realize, like another agreement that was almost agreed upon before the crisis, that we are ready to buy land to fulfill the needs of the community, but the rest of the land has not been identified. So we hope that we'll be able to, in a very short time, proceed with the agreement, the framework agreement, and go on to the negotiation to decide which land the people think they need. We are willing to discuss any land purchase.
Well, see, according to Canadian law, the municipality of Oka legally owns this. We don't recognize it, but this is according to Canadian law. The mayor of Oka and his council have said they will never sell this parcel of land. So the hands of Canada are tied right now, the government that is, because the municipality won't sell this land. But the problem that we have here is a long historical problem. And that, I think, has to be settled either through an international court venue or just by a government who has open minds, because I don't think this one is open. And they were personally involved in last year's crisis, so I think they have a lot at stake as far as their reputation goes.
The federal government, headed by the Conservative Party and its leader Brian Mulroney, certainly does have a stake in this crisis. It paid $3.3 million for the wrong piece of land. It mobilized its army. And to this date, no level of government has claimed direct responsibility for ordering the police assault on the barricades in the Pines early on July 11, 1990, when warriors and unarmed women and children were present, and the tragic shooting of Corporal LeMay occurred. Coming up, you'll hear the government's response on September 25, 1990 to the crisis. Next on Aboriginal Voices. What started out as a land dispute at Oka gave rise to all kinds of racial tension and unresolved Aboriginal grievances. It became a symbol of Mohawk land rights and Mohawk sovereignty. When Parliament resumed on September 25, 1990, the barricades were down, but the people of the Pines were still inside the treatment center. Prime Minister Brian Mulroney addressed the House with a speech many of the Mohawk people, and indeed all Aboriginal people, wouldn't soon forget. It was during this speech that the Prime Minister stated that the disputed land had been purchased on behalf of the Mohawk people, and that the reason for the conflict was the larger issue of sovereign independence.
Rather, the warriors, acting against all of the peaceful and noble traditions of Canada's Mohawks, the warriors, advised by foreign legal counsel, have been seeking recognition that their communities are independent and that the laws of Canada do not apply to their lands and to their activities, which in the past have included smuggling and gambling on a very large scale. They have sought by various means to circumvent the Canadian justice system. The warriors' demands are not simply ideas on which reasonable people can agree or simply agree to disagree. They strike at the very heart of what Canada is all about. The warriors have been acting as if the concept of native self-government means national independence. Madam Speaker, I want to be very clear on this point. Native self-government is something that can bring great honor and great accomplishment and great justice to native peoples, and indeed it shall. But it does not and cannot ever mean sovereign independence within Canadian territory. Mohawk lands are part of Canadian territory, and Canadian law must and does apply to us all.
Last September, Brian Mulroney made some comments in the House of Commons when Parliament resumed about the Mohawks and about the situation. He also said at that time that he would never recognize, or the Canadian government would never recognize, native self-government as meaning national independence. Can you comment on that?
I think he has an illusion that the Declaration of Sovereignty over Native people was something that we consented to when they passed the BNA Act and other acts. We have never given up our independence. We're not asking Canada to become a sovereign, independent nation within a nation. We're telling them that we have a right to our territory. We have a right to our birthright and our ancestral lands. It's his people that are constantly violating our jurisdiction and our territory through development, through the police forces, like last year when they tried to kill us, through their army. And it's them. It's the Canadian government who do not respect the laws. They always talk about respecting, everyone is equal under the law, yet our laws have never been respected. There were treaties signed when one nation violated another person from another nation. They would take care of their own. They haven't. We've always taken care of and never asked for anything that we are not entitled to.
The people of the Longhouse adhere to traditional Mohawk laws and customs. The Great Law of Peace, said to be one of the oldest constitutions in the world, states that anyone who ceases to follow traditional customs in favor of an outside system of government alienates themselves from the Iroquois Confederacy. This includes the Indian Act system and the imposed band council system of elected chiefs.
Is the traditional system not a democracy, and is that why the federal government doesn't recognize it?
With the Longhouse people, because in 1924 they outlawed the Confederacy, they don't view us as being any kind of legitimate government. They look at us as being a museum piece, and we're far from being that. We've had to put up with a lot of racism and oppression, and we are still demanding that they sit down and negotiate with the real people. And the democracy in that clan system is a true democracy where everyone sits down in their clans and discusses and then makes a decision through the clans. With this other system, it is again certain people dictating authority to the rest of the community, and I don't view that as a democracy. I view it as a quasi-democracy, like the Canadian elective system.
In the early months of the summer of 1991, the Government of Canada held a plebiscite in Ganassadoge so that the community could decide what form of government they would like. Less than half of the people in Ganassadoge participated in the plebiscite. They chose the band council system, and this is who the government decided to continue negotiations with.
Because you only have 48% of the population that participate in the plebiscite, the other 52%, a majority of which are traditional people who will not get involved in a foreign system, if you do not have those people represented, will you not find yourself in the same position as last year?
If you think of the results of other elections, as much as in Kanawaki or in Akwesasne, to my knowledge, either Joe Norton and Mike Mitchell has been elected with less than 50% of the population also. So, and in any democratic population, if you think election in municipality in Quebec, it's the same situation. So, unfortunately, I agree with you that it doesn't represent the whole majority, but I mean, you've got to deal with one way of trying to find out how does the community wants to be governed.
What is the present band council of Ganassadoge doing to resolve the disputed land?
There's a framework agreement that was rejected by this community 2 years ago, which is what the Canadian government offered us again for the negotiations that have been renewed that are going on now, whereby they buy up the land to unite one Mohawk's land to another Mohawk. If there was a French person living in between, they'll buy up that land. But in that process, we lose land that is our commons. So we lose our mountain. We lose this area because there are no Mohawks living around this area. It's all non-natives and the golf course. So we would lose this land under that agreement anyways. This is what they're ready to accept. They're ready to accept the jurisdiction of the Canadian government. They're ready to accept provincial jurisdiction. And the Longhouse has stated before, we will not recognize a provincial government. It is a nation-to-nation basis that we want to deal with. And we do not want to become a municipality through reserve status here, which is what's been worked on. And in spite of what Mr. Sidden has said, the majority of people did not participate in the plebiscite or the elections. 55% did not participate. So that, I think, is a very clear message that we do not want the Indian Act system here. People want a different change. We don't want the so-called democracy and the self-government that Indian Affairs is offering us.
This is Ganawage, part of the Mohawk Nation territory. The barricades are down, the army is gone, and the Mercier Bridge is open. But the entrance to the central core of Kahnawake is still guarded against possible invasion. Why is there still a checkpoint? And why did the Mohawks of Kahnawake get involved in a land dispute at Oka in the first place? Andrew, we noticed when we came into the community that there's still a checkpoint. I'm wondering, why is it, do you think it's still necessary to have a checkpoint in place? The army is gone now and the barricades are down.
The checkpoints are there for the simple reason that we don't trust the Quebec government. Quebec governments give the perception that they're in control of their police force. And that's the Sûreté de Quebec, provincial police in Quebec. And we don't believe that's so, and that at any time or any given time, the SQ or the RCMP would come into this community, whether by accident or an intentional accident, or a campaign to establish what they call their jurisdiction in the community. There's always that threat, so we feel that those checkpoints are necessary to keep the SQ and to remind them that there will be resistance towards something like that.
The community of Kahnawake is also part of the Iroquois Confederacy. It is currently under the imposed band council system. Andrew DeLille Jr. works at the Mohawk Nation office. He too is a traditionalist and sees the reasons for getting involved in the crisis as one of nationhood.
There are 7 communities, Ganyange Haga communities, and for each community, the way the great law is interpreted here in Kahnawake is responsible for the protection of those laws to the extent as they see necessary, depending on what the circumstances are surrounding them. The position we are probably more progressive in that area because of what happened in this area, but we're sure that the feeling is the same throughout the rest of the communities.
So they're your people and you were there to help them. Basically, they were attacked by an outside force and you were there to assist them.
That's right,
The
exactly.
situation.
What the community of Kahnawake decided to do was erect barricades to block access to this bridge, the Mercier Bridge, which links several communities to the city of Montreal. Commuters were forced to go around the blockade, which sometimes took up to 2 hours. It was near the end of the standoff when the army was slated to come in and remove the barricades. It was decided that elderly men, women, and children would leave Kahnawake and the potential violence. When this convoy arrived on the bridge, there were only a few protesters. The police made the convoy wait for 2 hours in stifling heat, just enough time for the number of protesters to swell, along with their anger.
Actually, it was scary. I was actually scared at one point, in fear of the children. Women, these people are innocent. As far as I'm concerned, this doesn't concern them. This concerns the warriors and the government of Quebec. And what I've seen happen here today, in fear of these children and women, woo.
But the violence against this community didn't stop. Even after the barricades were down, the government of Canada sent its army to raid the island of Kahnawake, armed with rifles, riot gear, and tear gas. They said they were looking for weapons.
Andrew, it was here on September 18, 1990, that what has been described as the most violent confrontation took place in the 78-day standoff. What kind of emotional and psychological impact has that had on the community, and even the economic impact?
I think a lot of, you have the ripple effects in the community where a great number of people releasing their tension. There was a long period of time that I felt that a lot of people were like sort of numb about the whole thing. numb, meaning nobody wanted to really talk about it. They were tired of the hostility, the confrontation, the tension, and so forth, and they were looking for any way to escape from it. That you saw a lot of people try to get back to work, and more frustration again when the jobs weren't there anymore, and a lot of our people still cannot leave or are afraid to leave the community for one reason or the other. Outstanding warrants and so forth. Economically in Kahnawake, it's at a standstill. I think it would be safe to say that it's stagnant at this time. I know that the local bank here has somewhat 25 million or so to lend, and no one or nothing to lend it to. So the economy is at a standstill. There's no progress. And in fact, I believe it went in the reverse a bit because of the loss of jobs.
There are many Mohawk people who are to be tried in court for their actions during the 78-day standoff on charges of rioting, obstruction of justice, weapons assault, and death threats, to name a few. The people of Kanesatake have asked for a moratorium on all development until the dispute is settled, but the condominiums are slated to go through.
I don't understand why the Canadian government just doesn't expropriate this land. It's still in dispute. They have in the past expropriated thousands and thousands of acres of Aboriginal land. Why can't they do it in this case?
That lends one to question the motivations and the actions of the Canadian government. If they are who they claim they to be, you know, the highest form of government in Canada, then one would think that they would have jurisdiction over the municipality of Oka, that they would try and correct the mistake that they did a long time ago and say, listen, legally, this was not done right. Because Kanesatake, which is Oka, is so close to Montreal and is such prime real estate land, that's another factor which I think comes into it here. The amount of money being poured into development here could be one of the motivating factors of why the situation is the way it is right now. It probably is. So there again is another problem. And we know the lengths that people go to for money. I mean, that was part of the motivating factor last year. We stood in the way of millions of dollars of an 18-hole golf course expansion. And they tried to kill men, women, and children for it. So what next?
That's our program for this week. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dale Montour. Onagiwahi, Sego de Dese.